Welcome back. Next, let's take a look at assignment and aggregations within qSQL. So we already showed assignment in the previous video, and I mentioned that was colon, and that equality is done using equals. So we showed this within the qSQL statement above. We created that new column, which was the sum of fair plus tip. And in this example, we're just using assignment outside of the qSQL statement. So I've got my qSQL statement on the right-hand side, and then I'm assigning it to a variable called Jan09. Also, just to point out, we've thrown in another keyword here called within. So if we check out our reference card, we go to keywords and we go to W and we'll see within. That will basically bring us to our description of within with our syntax and lots of examples that are really useful to use. So within will basically bring you back the results within two different boundaries. And in our example here, we are using dates as our boundaries. So we're going from the 10th to the 31st of Jan. So if we run this cell, and then we're going to run count on that result set, we're going to basically see we've got a much smaller result set than we did initially at the top when we had our 41 million. So now we've obviously reduced that data set down, and we've stored this in memory. So it's worth noting, once we've assigned this here, it's just in memory for us to use. And that's really useful, obviously, when you're working and you're doing data discovery. You'll often want to store intermediate results before your final result, so that you don't have to keep going and running the same code again. And that's how you can do it. Okay, so we have a quick exercise here. So assign the result of exercise 2 to a variable called res2. So it's going to be very similar to this, except you're using the result from the exercise in the previous video. So you can pause the video and try that out. And then once you're happy with that, let's move on and look at aggregations in qSQL. So we've already seen some aggregations. We've seen count above. I also skipped over, but we did come across min when we were looking at min date, and we have max as well to use with things like average, median, sum. So we've got lots of inbuilt aggregations within Q. Again, if you want to read on any more of them or get some more examples, you can always just come here and you can find out which one you're looking for. Click on the link and you'll get all the information you need to know about it there. So I can do things like run aggregations on my columns. So instead of calling all the fares back and all the tips, I'm just running a simple sum on those. So there's another exercise here. Have a go with that, calculating the minimum and maximum tip from the Jan09 table. Once you're happy with that, let's move on. Look at grouping with by. So this is probably the first biggest diversion from SQL. In that we can perform aggregations and grouping separately in qSQL. So for example, I can run by here, which is doing a grouping by. And when I haven't selected any aggregation in front of my fair column, you'll see I just have the word fair. And then by here, by vendor, comes after the select and before the from. And then it's just listing out all the different fares by my vendors. So I've got 3 vendors. I've got CMT, DDS and VTS, which is okay, not that useful. I guess you can kind of see what might be more useful in this example would to be to add an aggregation at the beginning of that. So I'm going to do my sum of my fares and my sum of my tip by vendor from Jan09. So this is much easier to read. I've got my 3 vendors again, and now I can see my sum of my fares and also of my tips. So you can just think of it like a pivot table in Excel, and you can add in multiple columns here if you want to pivot by. So if I can remember any of the other columns of the tables, let's just do that here. Add a new cell. If I do calls, trips, or we'll use Jan09. So let's say we also want to pivot on what would make sense. Maybe the duration. Why not? You can see my duration here. I'm getting obviously a lot more results. That's a numeric value for all the durations of the column or the trips. So you can build up your pivot, and you'll see that the result of a by is a key table. So you'll be able to tell the columns you pivoted on with this vertical line. So this vertical dotted line basically indicates you've got a key table. And we'll be looking at key tables in more detail later on. When I just have vendor, you'll see that that line only appears in between vendor and fair. Okay, so let's use that, but let's bring in our count I that we seen in the last video. So it's super useful when we use it with our by command. So you can see I'm using count I by date. So this is really nice. I can count all the records in the table. So this is probably like one of the first statements I usually run on any data set that I have. I can do a quick count, get a feel for how many records I'm getting daily into that table, and I don't need to do any column name lookup or anything. So that's our count I. So I've got a few exercises just to go over those. Actually, also I just want to point out this X here. So this will appear whenever if you don't provide a name for a computed column. So Q is going to just determine one, and it will by default assign X. Now, if you had some other columns in here, it would always, if you were doing, the fair plus tip that we've seen above. So let's just do that again. So fair plus tip, it will assign the leftmost column as the name. But when you don't have any columns, in the case of I, it's going to assign X. And if you did this statement more than once, we'll do it 3 times over and over again, you'll see it's going to just add 1 and then increase and add 2 to the end of it. So if the chosen name duplicates a previous one, it's going to suffix it with 1, 2, 3, etc. and so on, just to make it unique. So that's just worth pointing out what that X column is. When you run, so when you see X, you'll know that Q wasn't able to determine a column name from whatever calculation you did in here. Okay. So we've got 2 short exercises here. The first one, what is the biggest tip for each company? And then the second one, what is the highest tip and average tip per payment type? So have a go with those, and I'll see you in our next video.